Good morning, everyone. Good morning. So this panel is in English. We're going to do our best to speak slowly, right? Yeah. All right. Today we're going to be talking about content moderation on social media platforms, and particularly its impact in this part of the world, the ways that companies behave here, the ways that individuals use the systems of content moderation to have content taken down, and the innovative ways that people are working to ensure that content is both preserved and restored. So I've got two panelists, and they're going to do most of the speaking today. I'm going to moderate and occasionally chime in with some thoughts. On my right is Dia Kaeli, who works at Witness and is going to be presenting first. And on my left is Emna Mazuni from Article 19. Did I say the last name right? Yes. Awesome. All right, go ahead.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you. Okay, you are awake. Good. All right, so I'm just gonna go right into it, and we have enough time that we're gonna really be able to have some Q&A. So if you have questions, hold them, and we're gonna do our best to answer them. So I guess I should say a little bit about where I work. Witness is an organization that supports people who are using video and related technologies to expose human rights abuses. And sometimes that's through directly filming, sometimes it's through creating archives and collecting videos and verifying them, and sometimes it's through storytelling. And the work that I do specifically is I'm the program manager for tech and advocacy. And the most important part of that for this talk is that a lot of what I do is go talk to these big social media platforms, other tech companies, but social media platforms are the main focus, for reasons you can guess, and talk to them about how their tools and policies can either help or hurt human rights defenders. And unfortunately, especially in the last year, most of that conversation has been about content moderation. It's about the decisions that companies are making about what gets to stay on the platform. So, that being said, I just wanted to give some definitions so that we know we're all talking about the same thing here. Content moderation is the process through which companies determine what they're going to be or what is going to be allowed and not allowed on their platforms. And I'm going to show you a flow chart of what that looks like. But another important concept to know when talking about content moderation is also algorithms, specifically machine learning algorithms. So machine learning algorithms are algorithms that don't just perform one task. It's not just a set of instructions. It's a set of instructions that also contains within it instructions for how to change and grow and make more decisions. And it becomes very hard for people to actually tell, and in this case, impossible, as Mark Zuckerberg just admitted in a recent blog post, to determine how these machine learning algorithms are making their decisions. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about how content moderation happens, because so how many people have ever heard seen someone say on their Facebook, like, oh, the algorithm took my content down? I'm glad I asked. There's a number of people. I just wanted to flag that, pun intended, that the way that content moderation happens at this point right now is still mainly with people making decisions. So usually in the past, all content moderation happened by flagging. Users would flag things on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitter. Those things would go to a person. The person would make a decision, and then that decision was final. So one of the differences now is, as you can see in the bottom left corner, now content or accounts can also be automatically, to a certain extent, flagged by algorithms. What I mean by to a certain extent is they're just doing the initial flagging. Human moderators are still looking at this content. So This is a little bit more complicated maybe than it needs to be, because I wanted to point out that, so human content moderator makes a quick decision, and we're gonna talk a little bit about how they have to make those decisions and in what conditions. So they decide to leave the content or the account up, or they decide to remove it. Then it will go to an appeals process where available. And we are seeing that there's more appeals available, but we don't actually know if that's going to work. So these other boxes here are pointing out how another way that you can deal with this is if you are famous or you can get lots of bad press, then content can be restored. We've seen some famous examples of this. There was a famous photo from the Vietnam War that got taken down. Lots of conversation about it in the press. It got restored. But an ordinary user doesn't have that option, right? If you don't know someone who knows someone, and if you're not famous, you don't have these other options. These other two red squares are, I wanted to point these out as things that are a little bit outside of the normal process. So one of them is when content is removed at the request of a government, usually via a direct content at the platform. We're going to talk a little bit about that. And then at this point now, the only kind of content we know that gets automatically removed is content that has been hashed, meaning it's just put through a process so that it can be in a database. There's a mathematical representation of it, and content can then be automatically removed if it's been put into one of these databases. Images, yes, sorry, not posts. So this is one other way, and sorry, the reason I just have it in mind as content is because I'm almost always only talking about images. And then as you can see, there's still big question marks about whether any of these appeals processes that we've heard about recently will actually work. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a specific example of some work that I have spent a lot of time on in the last year and a half. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about one of our partners one of Witness's partners that couldn't be here. So this is a real-world example of a huge amount of content being taken down, and specifically how an algorithm could affect that. In June of 2017, Google announced very proudly that it was going to start using machine learning algorithms to detect extremist content. And the reason I'm doing this is to point out who decides what extremist content is, and how does a machine decide that? There's a lot of questions around that. So Google proudly announced, great, we're going to be using this machine learning algorithm. We're going to start getting this dangerous content taken down much more quickly. So just to take a step back, the kind of content that I'm talking about, this human rights evidence that has been disappearing and removed from platforms, this is content that I mentioned the work that Witness does. So this is content, videos in particular, sometimes images, that are increasingly important. This is an image of the first International Criminal Court arrest warrant that was based on videos from social media. There was some other evidence, but the main evidence was videos. This is an homage to the fact that there are a lot of people out there that just want to say that all of these videos are meaningless, they're fake, you can't verify them. So this is one of the investigations that our partner Syrian Archive has done. They have a lot of investigations, and I apologize, I should have mentioned that this picture was going to be here. I took a lot of the other pictures out of this presentation. A lot of these videos are really terrible to look at. But this is just a good example of a small investigation that they did. They went through, they looked at videos that were on YouTube, that were on Facebook, occasionally on Twitter. Mainly the big platform that we've been working with, though, is YouTube, which is owned by Google. So that announcement that I showed you from June of 2017, that was effective for YouTube. So they're going through these videos, and they use geolocation. They look at things like correlating with other social media information like tweets. analyzing the dialect of people in the video, looking at the shadows, looking at the location of the sun. All of these different processes that they go through to verify, is this video showing what the caption says that it's showing? And is it information that could be useful in the future for the UN independent investigative body that's looking at what's happening in Syria, for the International Criminal Court, for the authorities that are doing these structural investigations. So the Swedish and German authorities have structural investigations, meaning they can look at everything happening and try to prosecute crimes based on that. And these videos are a big source for them. It's a very hard situation to get evidence in, evidence that would be used in a court. So they have to use social media, sometimes just to get them in the right direction, sometimes to do things like issue a warrant. So around July, so about a month after Google made its announcement that it was using this machine learning algorithm, Syrian Archive started hearing from partners and just seeing on their own platform that many, many videos were being removed. And so this is a very old figure. This is from just a few months after this all started. But they saw that about 20% of the videos that they were interested in looking at or verifying had been removed. I won't go through all these numbers, but at this point, they've tracked, I think it's somewhere in the number of almost 300,000 videos that have been removed. And these are videos that are potentially incredibly important evidence. So what kind of videos were being removed or channels were getting shut down? One of the first channels that we saw get shut down was the Violations Documentation Center. So VDC is a group that has been cited by the UN. It's been cited by lots of mainstream media in the US and elsewhere, and by universities. It's a well-known group to people who do human rights work, but YouTube's content moderators had never heard of VDC. They shut down the channel. And now VDC, I should say, they got so tired of this that they aren't even using YouTube anymore, which is not the case with some of the other groups we work with. Yeah.
No, I was just clearing my throat.
Fortunately, the Syrian Archive archives all of the videos that it verifies. It's very fortunate because the link here, the Orient News video link here, that video's gone. It's been removed. I'm gonna skip past this. But one of the things to keep in mind is you can only track so much what is getting removed. And so we really have no idea how much evidence is gone at this point. This is the Sham network. This is a channel that has been shut down, I think at this point, maybe 6 times. They know that this channel exists. They have no system in place for ensuring that it doesn't get shut down again. So fast forward a few months. YouTube proudly announces that over 75% of the videos that they're removing for violent extremism were taken down before any user actually flagged them. So that's in a few months. And this is over a year ago. You can imagine now, Facebook, for instance, says that 99% of content that's taken down for violent extremism is without receiving a single human flag. So the impact is huge. Syrian Archive has released its chemical weapons attack database since this, but they found a lot of missing videos. Fortunately, they're a group that has them archived. Not everyone is going to have these things backed up. I'm going to skip past this. And, okay, good. So this is just one specific example of how content moderation is changing. It's happening more quickly. It's happening with the assistance of machine learning. And we've now been in touch, both Witness and Syrian Archive have been in touch with YouTube for a year and a half about this. To be honest with you, I think the reason that they are even comfortable with us talking about it publicly is because this got a lot of press. I'm gonna go back to my, I'll just leave the how content moderation happens slide up. So this lots of bad press step in here, that also works for organizations. So I think that's one of the only reasons they're even comfortable with us talking about the fact that we're working with them to get these videos restored, because it looks a little bit better, they care about the issue. But it's a year and a half later, and we're still seeing videos removed daily. Videos that are absolutely not extremist content, videos that are maybe graphic, but definitely fall into the exceptions for the prohibition against graphic violence, and really important evidence. So there's very little accountability. People who are getting messages about this don't understand why their content is getting taken down, and it's happening so quickly. So I'm going to pass it on. This is just one specific example, and we're going to talk about more, and we'll have Q&A as well.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Emna Mizouni from Article 19 MENA. I would bring the perspective to another side of the MENA region right now, talking about specifically the case of a prominent blogger detained in Egypt. So yesterday we heard Mohamed Najm talking about Ala and how he wouldn't miss this occasion to be with us and to talk about digital rights and human rights in our region. But it's a similar case for Wael Abbas. And why I'm bringing the case of Wael, because of content removal, basically. We're taking his example as one of the major examples that could build on the case of the Syrian archive here. So basically last year, December 2018, no, 2017, yeah. So on the 17th of December, 18th of December 2017, the Twitter account of the prominent blogger, award-winning journalist, a human rights defender, Wael Abbas, was removed, suspended, and with no prior notification. It was like we just went on Twitter and we did not find that account. It was a verified account with more than 350K followers, and with a very funny tag on his bio to say if you're under 18, don't follow me because I'm talking using bad words and extreme in my views. So there was that warning. Yet the account was suspended. In the case of Wael, with what happened, international media were talking about that, Guardian and other media outlets talked about the case of how Twitter is shutting down voices of human rights defenders from the region. And we did not know how to deal with that, although that Wael was very known, he has connections, but this did not help us in getting his account back. He created another temporary account. It was suspended too. And it was directly shutting down a voice from Twitter. People who were against him, they were campaigning. Even those who were against were campaigning for his account to be back, because we need diversity in terms of content on social media platforms. And prior to this, what happened in 2017 for him was that several platforms were removing content from his accounts. So Wael is known as someone who has a big influence in Egypt, and who is basically using those platforms to voice those who are undervoiced or underrepresented, or who have no access to media or elsewhere. So basically, since the age of Mubarak in Egypt, Wael was putting videos of torture, videos of investigation processes, content leaked from the government and elsewhere, and everything that is against human rights, basically. His YouTube channel was shut down as well, so we lost all the archive, and unfortunately he was not as clever, or we did not expect that all of us, I guess, the content removal. We did not expect it to happen, so he had no other backup. So we lost, I think, more than 10 years of record of what happened in Egypt before the revolution. And after that, it was like the Facebook. So it was like a continuous process. Social media platforms were not playing the same role as they did in 2011 in the Arab uprising. So basically, we're seeing a new era of how the Arab activists are dealing with the content removal. Now they're not notified. Wael is one of the cases. Although he had connections, he did not succeed in getting his account back. He did not succeed even with the international endorsement and with the techies. This was a hopeless case for him to get his Twitter account back, to get a few posts on Facebook. And he was blaming all those platforms. I mean, I think we all do not know, as like general public, if we're not in contact, direct contact with those companies, we do not know how the process is working. And basically, it's so frustrating for those activists, all of us included, basically, to know how to deal with such situation and how to move on. Other situations were like of, for example, Libyan activists, women rights defenders who were like targeted, receiving threat messages, and the hate speech or the community standard basically said that no, this is not a hate speech, this is not threat. And then we've seen people like Salwa Garigas, the judge in Libya who was killed in 2014, and she was receiving hundreds of death threats. Nobody responded to that by taking down that content. And here we're questioning a bit, like what's going on in terms of content moderation, really. So basically, it's like the cases are different from a country to another, but in places like Egypt, when we relied a lot on hearing from those activists online, we've seen like those activists losing their voice, their online mobilization and their online record. So we're losing kind of the credibility on what's happening there. In other cases, we're like threatening lives. But when you talk to, for example, when you talk to Facebook, they say like, yeah, we can review because you're a trusted contact, so we can review for that person. If that person is not famous, if that person does not have enough contacts within the network and still is a human rights activist, his right would be gone with those platforms. So it's so unfortunate, but I hope it could change. So basically, to respond to one of the famous things, what we could do, campaigning is one thing, like advocating for those activists and giving them the platform where they can report, to have a right to appeal, for example, and to have the appropriate people to judge their content, because sometimes we're seeing, like we're very diverse in this region in terms of languages, for example. We need people who speak the language and understand the context of the language. Otherwise, it could sound as threat or violent content or whatever kind of content that is against the community standards, basically. So yeah, I mean, what happened exactly and what is happening right now is like there is a huge dispute between the human rights defenders who are not part of the digital world and the social media companies. There was a letter that was released like a couple of weeks ago and signed by 70 organizations. Sorry, I'm outdated. So 105 organizations signed a letter for Mark Zuckerberg about the right to appeal and right to know. I mean, how come that a big company is treating that content and taking down content without letting people know or letting people even have the right to appeal for that? So this is a big step, I think. Like, I do believe that it's a big step, and we need to like push for it even more. I know that Facebook is responding somehow to this by like several consultations to see how to adjust this process. But yeah, it's not only Facebook, because we've seen YouTube. YouTube shut down the channel of Wael Abbas and other channels as well, of other activists in Tunisia, for example, or other people, like people who are just putting content there to make what's happening in their countries visible. And the tag would be violence, extremism. But violence and extremism is something that you cannot, based on that, remove content. In other cases, we can give an example of, sometimes we see, especially in the case of women's rights defenders, they're targeted with smearing campaigns, like very harsh campaigns, and nobody would care about that. And they would say, oh no, the hate speech doesn't apply in this case. And it's like, excuse me, but if you take it as, yeah, you're laughing because we have one case in that sense. Maybe you could talk a bit about it later on in the debate. But it's like usually people, they do not get it in the context. So for example, if I compare this, and I'll be very brief, if I compare this to what happened to Wael on Twitter, it was basically Twitter, when they responded after more than 12 days to Wael after the suspension of his account, they said that the account was removed because of hate speech and violence and passive aggressiveness toward other community members. And they said, like, we might be wrong, but we know that if we take your tweets out of context, they seem violent, and they seem like having a lot of hate speech. But if we put them in the context of that thread or that discussion, we understand why you responded in that way. But we're sorry, we're going with this suspension, with no right to appeal. With all the efforts that we've done, no, it was a no. After that, we see in another platform, which is Facebook, and the case of women rights defenders who are like trying to get in touch with the platform and to say, like, we're receiving death threats, or we're receiving, like, it's a smearing campaign against us, but nobody would take that content down. And I could, like, name many people in this, including, I need to say her name, including Loujain El-Hadloul, who is right now detained in Saudi. I mean, she received like hundreds of death threats, of smearing campaigns, and especially in May when she was arrested in Saudi, she was like literally labeled as a traitor, and none of that content was taken down. I mean, there is a kind of double standards in here, so we need to hold those platforms to account, and we need to put a pressure on them by campaigning, advocating, discussing with them, but we really need to sort this out.
Thank you. So since we've got enough time, I'm just going to weigh in for a few minutes and talk a little bit, tying what you've said together, around some of the policies and how this happens. So we've heard about takedowns, particularly related to Syria and to war, to archiving. We've heard about the cases of human rights defenders. I've been looking at this issue for almost 10 years, and I agree with everything that my panelists have said. I've seen this happen. I think what's really interesting is watching the ways that companies create policies in reaction to real-world events. So when I look at some of the early cases, Wael Abbas in 2007 was one of the very first people to make news, make international headlines for having his account taken down. And in that case, it was because he had posted a video of police brutality from a police station in Cairo. This video had already been circulating, but when he posted it, it went even more viral, before the term viral was really a thing, and YouTube took down his account. Now, in that case, we were able to get it put back up, as you mentioned, and that was early days when companies, kind of admitted that they didn't really know what they were doing. And they would sometimes restore content because an academic group or a human rights group contacted them. And of course, that still happens, but as things progressed over the next couple of years, some of the things that I saw and was able to actually weigh in on myself, talk to companies myself, sometimes they would not make that kind of decision. So there are a couple of other famous cases. Another example is from Morocco in 2010, 2011, before the uprisings happened. There were a number of atheist groups that were repeatedly taken down on Facebook. And we would talk to Facebook and they would review the content, say, yes, this doesn't violate the rules, the content would get put back up, and then it would get taken down again. And so people stopped creating those groups over and over. And actually the most recent time that I've looked at this, about 2 years ago, that was still happening pretty consistently. And a lot of this is similar to the case that Emna talked about with Wael and Twitter, where part of the reason that this happens is because of the mobbing, let's say, the abuse of reporting processes. When a number of people or bots or quasi-state actors get together and try to report someone in order to silence them. And unfortunately, this can be an effective tactic, even though it doesn't necessarily happen because of, it's not because, 100 people reported something and therefore it automatically goes down. No, it's rather the fact that when something is reported and then reviewed and then reported again and then reviewed again, the chances, the literal odds, if we're talking gambling, the odds of that content going down become higher. And then just to touch on a couple of other quick topics, I think what you've said about extremist content and terrorism is interesting because this is one area where the companies have repeatedly reacted rather than creating policies that are actually intended to reduce harm. So in 2012, YouTube took down a video that some of you might remember. Now, it was an offensive video, but it was not really against the rules, let's say. This was the Innocence of Muslims video. It was created by an Egyptian-American guy. It was very offensive to Islam. So YouTube took this video down, and at first we weren't really sure why, and then it went back up, and then they took it down only in Egypt and in Libya, and we're like, that's interesting. Why did that happen? It must be the governments. It turned out that it wasn't the governments of Egypt or Libya that asked to have it taken down, it was the US State Department. And they didn't do this through legal means. They called up their friends at YouTube and they asked them to block this video in these two countries because, people might riot. And then, of course, what happened? There was a trickle-down effect where a number of other governments jumped in and started sending legal requests to YouTube to take that video down. So YouTube never took the video down. What they did was they blocked it in some countries upon legal request, but in other countries they decided that that was not the law. So YouTube, Pakistan was a really interesting example here. Pakistan asked for that video to be removed in their country, and YouTube said no, because YouTube's analysis of Pakistani law, which I'm sure was absolutely accurate, I hope you caught my sarcasm, their analysis of that law was incorrect, or at least that's what the human rights groups that I talked to said. I'm not an expert on Pakistani law either. So what's interesting about that is after 2012, 2013, we saw more and more violent content for a number of different reasons. Some of it was documentary content documenting the horrors of war. Some of it was content put up by ISIS, propaganda, and other groups, of course, too. And companies would change their mind back and forth, YouTube especially. I remember in 2013 specifically, they said, we're going to allow beheading videos now. And maybe it was 2012, but everyone was like, wait, why? What? Why is that an important thing? And it was, okay, well, we want to make sure that these things are being documented and shared. And then they said, okay, no, we can't share that because that's terrorist propaganda. So they go back and forth. They're not thinking often of real world harm. What harm will this video do if people see it? What benefit will it have if people see it? And so there's all sorts of other things too. I'm not gonna go into much more detail, but just to give a quick nod to one other category that's really important to me on this is sort of sexual health information, LGBT content. That's one of the other things that frequently gets taken down all over the world, but especially in this region, and often because of companies' interpretations of what the market wants. So a really famous old example of this is Microsoft Bing, which nobody uses, I know, but they blocked every possible sexual search term from the entire Middle East and North Africa because, in their words, that's what the market wanted. And I talked to them about it, and I said, okay, does this have any basis in law? And what they actually told me on the phone back then was that no, Saudi Arabia wanted that, and so they decided to just go with what Saudi Arabia wanted and apply it to every other country. So you have basically Saudi Arabia dictating the policy for Lebanon, for Morocco, et cetera, et cetera. That was something that was able to get fixed, but this happens increasingly all the time. And yeah, we're still seeing that sort of thing happen with LGBT content as well. So I'll stop there and see if we have any questions to start off, and then, oh, okay. So if we've got enough questions from the audience, we will just go with those. If not, I can jump in and ask them questions, but I'd much rather hear from you. So I'm gonna take the mic around, and you guys can share the other mic? Okay, cool. Your hand went up first, so you get first dibs.
Good morning. Ali from Article 19. So I want to ask my colleague Amna. Sorry. What are the how economics play a role in content removal? I mean, the volume of users, the volume of paid advertisement by countries or in that country, how the economics. Sorry, Amna.
Okay. So, okay. Can I respond by an example for it? Okay.
It was around the question was how do economics play a role in the moderation of content in a specific country or in general?
Yeah. So basically, at some point, and maybe the Tunisians in the room could endorse that. If you're users of Twitter, you've noticed maybe sometimes like weird hashtags trending in Tunisia. Basically, one of those hashtags was Iran is a threat to North Africa. Why? Nobody knows. Who's tweeting that from Tunisia? Nobody. But it was trending and it was paid. Why? Because there is a country, a government that is sponsoring that hashtag just to play into politics plus the shareholders issue plus the promotion and the package that those governments are putting in those platforms. So we're talking about a biased platform, and whether Twitter is doing it like just for money and ignoring like and not standing by its values or not, I question this for you. But it's one of the contents that you would see usually if it's money, power. I would say that those platforms would just not respond to human rights or would push for some content instead of another. And especially in the cases of hashtags or in the cases of promoted tweets and targeted tweets, basically tweets or posts even on Facebook, not only on Twitter, but it's like that one was like the hashtag that made like raise the flag for us in Tunisia. It was like, what's happening? Why we're seeing that content, that hashtag specifically? And we've seen like more hashtags, like especially in the case of the Gulf crisis, Qatari standing by Tunisian women, for example, last year in the Fly Emirates scandal when they banned Tunisian women, and it was like paid. And in other cases, you see hashtags like, for example, the chaos in Tunisia, coming from where? From the UAE and Qatar, or from UAE specifically? And it's like we're just talking about agendas and about money and how they are investing in those platforms to target countries and individuals.
I saw a hand here.
One thing to that.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I note on the what we're trying to fix also is that so we mentioned a little. We're going to talk a little bit about how content moderation happens. Who here saw The Cleaners? So not everyone. So if you haven't seen The Cleaners, I highly recommend it. I was really sad that I wasn't able to check it out. But the people who are doing content moderation are not, for the most part, employees of these companies. They're people who get paid terrible salaries to sit around and look at videos that when I watch for 1 hour of the day, I have to go sit in the bathroom at my office and have a moment, because it's really terrible stuff to look at. We hear over and over and over again. If I hear it one more time, well, doing that is not scalable. When companies say that having enough content moderators to actually look at things individually, have human moderated appeals is not scalable, what they mean is that their shareholders would not be into it because it's going to cut into their profit margins. It is much more profitable for them to use machine learning algorithms. It's also more profitable for them to leave up certain types of content, but I think that's a separate discussion, like extremist content. That's a different issue. But yeah, they just don't want to pay for it. I think that's part of the bottom line.
So since there are so many questions, I see the hands. I do see your hands. We're going to take like 3 questions right now, answer those in a bunch, then take 3 more, etc. So I saw one hand here. I saw Ahmed. I saw you. And there was one other one, I think, that earlier. OK, that's good for now. We'll take your questions, and then we'll answer them.
And I'm going to move here. Because, yes, please. If I need to...
I actually love the way how can I say this? You ended up your comment, because I can jump on that one and what you said. Can we say that today Facebook, Twitter, Instagram have clear political agendas by leaving some content up and taking some down? So not only economics, I think it's also political, and sometimes the two merge, obviously, but political particularly, because when I report, for example, let's say it clearly Zionists comment online, it never gets taken down for some reason. But other content, which are probably more pro-Palestinian, never, they just disappear, par enchantement, just like that, whoop, magically. And it happened quite some time, right? So yeah, so those platforms have become political, and what do we do about it?
Hello. Actually, I have several questions. After all what you said, now I want to rethink in what is named in Arabic Spring. I think that there is somebody, maybe international, okay, controlling what he wants to people view in this Arabic Spring and what he refused. For example, we have in some countries police attacks the people who were rejecting the president, and in some other they said that police is doing this and they are not. Also, as you said, that there is an algorithm for this. I think it's not the algorithm, because I think that algorithm applied on YouTube is different than that applied on Twitter or other accounts. So if we take example Wael Abbas, we can see that his channels are removed from all these websites based on a request and not by the algorithm. Also, 2 more questions. This is not applied only on social media. This is applied on satellites. We have some Arabic channels, TV channels. They were restricted to have their okay. And finally, I don't think for political view only. Once I requested a book for special cases education. Maybe this is different. But they said to me, you cannot get this book because your country is restricted. Does this depend on algorithms? Okay.
I can answer that one. I'll answer that one after.
I just want to highlight another aspect of the case for Wael Abbas. That is not the loss, the damage was not only the erasure of his archive and the suppression of his right to expression, but that also, when he was later arrested by the Egyptian authorities, the pro-authority media were all parroting the same thing, that even Twitter could not tolerate him. So why should the authorities? And now, Twitter, in that case, was setting the boundary for what is to be tolerated and giving pretense to authoritarian regimes to take down other people and shut them down. And Wael Abbas is still in prison until this moment, waiting for some unknown case. Yeah.
Can I respond to this right now?
Yep. Yeah, that was 3. We'll take more after.
Okay.
And I'm going to answer a little bit too.
Yeah, so for the specific case of Wael, one of the charges against Wael right now is like because he is influencer on social media. Why? Yeah, being an influencer is like, with the new media law, it's like more than 5K, you're influencer, you're a journalist, you're spreading fake news, you. Whatever. So for this specific case, I mean, there was a targeted campaign against him, basically. One, the YouTube channel. Two, so yeah, the YouTube channel, the Facebook posts that were deleted once every while, and then the suspension of the Twitter account. And after he was unable to retake his account, it was basically those who are against, pro-government, pro-previous regime, they were like having fun on social media and saying that, yeah, he deserves that, and we advocated for that. So they said it out loud. They advocated for that, and that was kind of limiting his freedom of expression to one platform, which is Facebook and Instagram. And it was very limited, plus it was like kind of preparing for killing his persona when he was arrested, because people, they were like dealing with the case, yeah, he's like, even Twitter couldn't handle this man. He's he deserves what happens to him. So yeah, it's a big question mark. It was like a very prepared campaign against him, basically. For the political content, yeah, it's like what we could do about it, it's like raise awareness more and more, talk to those platforms and try to advocate for our rights and for more diversity and more freedom of expression. And just we should be bold and strong in that demand, because it's our right. In terms of like whether the content is targeted or not, definitely it is, with like the posts that are sponsored on Facebook or on Twitter, the promoted tweets coming from, for example, in the case of Tunisia, again, I would highlight posts targeting us specifically in some cases, occasions, like political occasions from specific country, targeting another country. It's like, what's happening in the Gulf, we can see it on our Twitter accounts, for example. What else? Traditional media. I mean, traditional media and social media, it's kind of the same in terms of freedom of expression and in terms of limitation. So if you get what I want to say, so it's like, it's likewise.
I'm going to weigh in on a couple of questions quickly, but I just wanted to find out, is this being recorded? Will it be on the internet? Because that's going to depend on how I answer this question. Okay. Okay. Well, I'll do my best here. Huh? It is? Okay, so then I'm not going to say everything that I want to say, but I'll talk to you about it in the garden after. Number one, I think that politically, yes. I mean, I don't think that there's a grand conspiracy behind the companies. What I think is happening is a couple of things. One is, if you look at Facebook, Sheryl Sandberg probably is going to run for office at some point. She's one of the highest people in that company, and she makes a lot of the controversial decisions. So like the terror of war photograph that happened a couple years ago, Nick Ut's famous photograph from, yeah, I'm not saying it's her specifically. What I'm saying is that those types of decisions around content get escalated all the way up to her and Mark Zuckerberg. We know this at this point. The New York Times just did a piece on some of this. There are other publications that have talked about it. And so when you have somebody up there who sees herself as part of, having a role in the Democratic Party, when you see her as someone who, has political ambitions, I mean, frankly, I think it's fair to say that Facebook is terrified of conservatives at this point. And so that's a US issue, right? That's coming from as an American. But when it comes to the region, I would say that a lot of times these companies have no idea what they're doing. They don't listen to their own policy people working in the regions. Those people are there more for show than they are to actually make policy. And I think when it comes to things like terrorism, or terrorism or extremist content, or the definitions of it. I'm not saying it's all terrorist content. A lot of times other stuff that gets caught in it is not. They're relying entirely on the US government to tell them what that is. And so, yes, there's bias. I think that it is political. Of course it's political, but I think I also want to caution, because a lot of times the media, we've seen in the US in particular, the media saying, oh yes, there's this conspiracy to take down conservatives, and of course that's not true. But that doesn't mean that there isn't bias at some levels. And then one of the things that you said, I just wanted to comment quickly on your content is not available in this country. Most of the time, that's because of copyright laws. And so when we think about, remember in the old days, buying a DVD, not a counterfeit one, but a packaged one, you can't watch it, like you can't watch a US DVD in Lebanon, you can't watch a Canadian DVD in South Africa, et cetera. The same thing happens on the internet. So a lot of times, like I live in Germany, where we can't watch most American pop videos on YouTube because the German rights holders, am I getting this right on the German rights holders, GEMA?
Yes, although it did finally improve after they came to a deal, but they had to make a deal.
So basically like these German copyright holders were, it's complicated, but anyway, we had a lot of content blocked in Germany for the exact same reason. And part of this is political. So when it's about books and things like that, it's a political choice for a rights holder to make something available. And a lot of times it's because they don't care about your market. They don't care about you as a reader, as a content viewer, as a customer. And there's other reasons too. I mean, I've dealt with issues like sanctions in the past so Sudan, a lot of times people can't get real copies of books there. Like, you go and you photocopy books in the copy shop. And so Sudanese were trying to get books like ebooks, but they couldn't get them because the ebooks were just not available because the US government had made some ridiculous law that ultimately prevented people from learning. And so, yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this is just so many layers upon layers of bad governance and bureaucracy that essentially inhibits people from being able to access information.
So just a few short answers. One, so in terms of a political agenda, I will say that capitalism is political, and deciding that making money is more important than human rights is political. And so if companies have any political agenda, the number one is making as much money as they can and doing the bare minimum that they can to comply with human rights, enough to satisfy the public and not have too much bad press and not, make the share price go down a little bit. That being said, there are definitely, I think companies as a whole, I always like to say, companies in the US, there's a legal idea that companies are people, right? But companies are also made up of people. And I think this is really important to remember at Facebook, at Google, at Twitter, that the company itself has a sort of typical behavior you can expect from it in the global political community. Like we've seen Facebook's typical behavior of sort of act first, figure out the consequences later, and just sort of throw your weight around and be a little bit of a bully, or maybe a lot of a bully. But also individuals at those companies still have influence and still make decisions. And in particular, Jillian mentioned LGBTQI information in this region. The people who are enforcing content aren't just machines, even though companies try to make them act like machines. They have their own beliefs, their own opinions. And a really good example of that is content from Myanmar. Everybody in the sort of human rights community and in the Rohingya community was completely convinced, and if you look at how many apologies Facebook has made now, about content in Myanmar, everybody was completely convinced that all of the people who are moderating this content hate Rohingya people. And they certainly, as far as we know, they don't have any Rohingya people working for them doing content moderation.
No, and they had in their own training manuals, Facebook had fake news in their own training manual about the Rohingya. There was an image that was actually from Tibet, and it was Facebook, they don't even get the information right sometimes when they're training their own employees.
Yeah. So in this region, there's been a lot of concern that people who are doing moderation are anti-LGBTQ, they want to take that content down. It's a bonus for them that they're getting paid to do it. So there is that kind of political agenda, I would say. To the issue about absolutely, algorithms are not the only thing that take things down. And if you look at the dates on that, It's only in June of 2017 that Google announced that it was using this algorithm, the specific extremist content algorithm. Governments make direct requests all the time. One of the things that I really want to see companies do, so if you are in DC, in Washington, DC, lobbyists have to say who they go talk to. I think companies should have to say, these are all the requests that we got from an email from somebody in a government, because that happens all the time. Governments just have an email of someone at a company, they reach out, they get something taken down. A very famous example of this is Palestine, right? The Israeli government has bragged so much about how successful they are at things getting taken down. And so, you know, we do know that there's these direct contacts and things get taken down in that way. Yeah, I think that was it.
So I'm going to take a couple more questions, and then I want to make sure that each of us, 1, 2, 3, in that order, because I'll be super quick, have a chance for whatever last word we want to say, maybe something that has to do with what we can do about this, so that we're giving you some sort of action at the end. So hands if you have a question. If not, we can just keep talking. Jessica has a question. Great.
No, you have lots and lots of time. I was just curious if so last week at the Internet Governance Forum, President Macron spoke, and I don't think you've touched on this yet. But one of the things that he announced was that Facebook was going to allow French regulators some kind of special access for 6 months to Facebook, and I'm wondering if any of you have any more insight into what that actually means.
So I can not stand next to the speaker. And what the implications of that would be. Okay. Just making sure there weren't any other hands before we answer? Yep, one more? Okay, cool.
So on the subject of how many layers of laws and political agendas influence content moderation on Facebook, I'm wondering if there's any, on the flip side, any coordinated organization between advocates of things like net neutrality and things like access to information to respond to all of this content moderation on Facebook, as well as the other issues that, I mean, these companies are involved in, like Google's Great Firewall of China and all of the accompanying issues.
That was a perfect setup for, I think, the things all of us want to say to wrap it up. So thank you. There's one more question from
yes.
Mohamed.
I'll just bring it over to you.
Thank
Stay
you.
where you are.
Thanks. So you mentioned an open letter to Facebook, to Mark Zuckerberg. Is it online? Is it like, can we sign it as well? Is it open for more signatures? And is there similar effort to target or to address other big companies? So like Twitter, Google.
Sweet. Yes, Google. So, okay. I'm going to answer that one real quick just because I did a lot of that stuff, and then we'll keep going. So the open letter, I meant to talk about this earlier, so I'll just do it now. Back in February, a group of people who happened to be in a room together, it was just one of those things, decided to create a set of principles called the Santa Clara Principles for Transparency and Accountability and Content Moderation. We love long names. I was not in the room, but my colleagues were, and we created this set of principles which were meant to serve as a very basic guideline. These are not maximalist principles, they're very basic ones that everyone could agree on. And those groups put that out to very little fanfare. We got a little bit of press around it. But then this summer, Article 19 and my organization and a couple of other organizations said, okay, well, you know, let's start small. What could we take from the principles and build on top of that? And we decided to create this letter calling on Facebook to institute a full-scale appeals process. This is a very small ask in the grand scheme of everything we're talking about. We knew that. But 105 organizations agreed with us. And I love it because she helped us get many of those signatures. Thank you for that, Hinda. And so That letter went out about 2 days before Mark Zuckerberg made the announcement that Facebook was, in fact, going to institute a full appeals process. So we won a very small battle. We can give ourselves a tiny pat on the back and then keep going forward. Because I think the next ones are going to be Google, the next ones are going to be Twitter, and we're going to keep asking for more and more until we get it. So in terms of how people can get involved, we've closed down the signatures because I'm the one coordinating them and I'm tired. No, I'm kidding. We've closed down the signatures because it was A, it was organizations only, and B, we got what we wanted with that, so it doesn't really make sense to collect more. However, we are going to continue working with that group of signatories, and we're creating a mailing list, and I know everyone loves mailing lists, but we're creating different ways that people can get involved and continue on with those actions. So if anyone would like to be kept informed about that, give me your email. Give me your email address, preferably email me, so I'm just gonna give you my email address right now, write it down, and then email me your email address, because otherwise I will lose it in my luggage. jcy@eff.org. Easy, nine letters. Yeah, JCY. Oh, am I just putting this on the internet? Am I putting, yeah, I am.
Isn't your email address on the EFF website?
But this is my secret one, it's fine. Anyway, enough about that. And I'm happy to repeat it for you later if you need it. I don't want to spend too much time on that. So I just wanted to share that information. And then I want to turn it over to you, but I want to make sure that we get the question about Google and Dragonfly, so I can come back to that if you...
I can talk about that. So there is already an effort underway to address Google building Dragonfly. So for people who aren't familiar with this, for a very long time, Google has not been available in China, and they're now talking about building a censored search engine for China. Completely goes against Don't Be Evil, and it's something that they have now been called out publicly for. So there is efforts to address that, and one of the things I want to point out that's really exciting to see is how many people from within these companies are fighting against this. So before any, and all of our organizations signed that letter, right? Yes. Yeah. And many other people in the room. So this effort of sort of publicly calling out companies, doing open letters, this is a tactic that we're going to continue using. It at least gets us somewhere, you know, and then we push more from there. And I think Twitter, you know, also we'll see where that goes. And I just lost my chain of thought there. I was saying people inside companies. I think this is a really important group of people to think about and how we can work with them. And I think there's still connections to be made there. So for people who have not seen Mark Zuckerberg's letter that published, what it was just on Sunday? Friday. So there was a report recently that came out about how Facebook is hiring public relations firms to sort of manage the bad press that they're getting. And not just manage the bad press, actually investigate and potentially smear groups that are challenging them. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because Color of Change is a group that I've worked with, many people have worked with, and Facebook specifically had a PR firm that was investigating them and trying to figure out how they can weaken their opposition. Yeah, and I also just, one thing I want to point out in that letter, Mark Zuckerberg admitted that 1 out of 10 decisions that they make on content are incorrect. So letters, open letters is a lot of what we've done. There's also been physical protests in front of Facebook headquarters, which have been successful in getting press very quickly on issues, and I think there should be more of those. San Francisco is full of people who like to go to physical protests, so we should engage that more. And then last thing, in terms of getting involved, so there is a group of folks that is working on addressing these issues from a perspective that is not Western European or Anglophone, so not US, not Canada. So anybody here who is interested in getting involved with that group, they had a meeting at RightsCon this year, and I'm working with them We're doing a lot. I think there's going to be some really interesting things happening. I can't talk about a lot of it publicly, but that group is a lot of groups from Southeast Asia, and there's very little representation from this region. So I would really love to talk to anyone who wants to get involved. And there's a variety of different tactics that we're going to be using. There's a Signal group, there's a chat. So anybody who wants to get involved, just come find me afterwards.
I'm just checking the time real quick. Okay, cool. So I'm going to give you the last word, which means I'm just going to say the one other thing that I forgot to say, which is I think we should also just call on Mark Zuckerberg to resign.
I wouldn't be extremist and whatever, but I would say that content removal is something very threatening to freedom of expression. It's really worrying, and it's like it could be the reason why we cannot sleep at night. Basically because we're seeing like biased platforms, our views are changing, we're going toward like critical, more critical periods in the like political landscape in the world, like elections, scandals like Myanmar, the economic crisis in Iran, like what Masa was saying yesterday, many things. And in our region, it's very important because we're very new to that. We don't know how to deal with social media platforms. We don't know how to, like, we've been like taken by those big like applause of the Arab Spring and everything was perfect and Facebook was the reason why the regime was down in Tunisia and elsewhere, and then we're just facing some kind of a new change. It's a big change, and we need, as you mentioned, we need as a region, a whole region, to come together and just be very specific in our demands and our rights. It's like our right is to express ourselves, and it's like we're fighting for that in our countries, but at the same time we're fighting with those giants. So we need to be very pragmatic in the ways that we need to advocate and campaign against them, using their platforms basically, but at the same time bearing in mind that freedom of expression is very important.
We have like 3 more minutes. Any last words from you two?
Yes, actually, I noted this in my terrible handwriting on your notepad, and then I forgot to say it. One of the things, no, I remember what it is now. One of the things I wanted to mention is just the sort of moral and ethical weirdness of doing this work, especially as somebody who, I mentioned, like, one of the main problems with these platforms is capitalism, right? Like, I'm an anti-capitalist, and I go to these meetings at Facebook, and I eat their lunch from their fancy cafeteria, and
it's not that good.
No, it depends on which cafeteria you go to. And so it's a very uncomfortable position to be in, and I know that there are people in my sort of political community who probably judge me for it. And when I do this work, I'm really thinking of it from a harm reduction perspective. And what I mean by that is, does me talking to them and getting the tiny concessions that I get, because they are tiny, but then they also can affect hundreds, thousands of people, these small changes that we can get them to make in the notices that they send or the user interface that you have to deal with. So I have to, every time before I talk to them about something, I'm like, okay, are they gonna say in public, oh, we talked to civil society? Are they gonna try to use this to whitewash what they're doing? And it's a difficult question that I think probably like everyone in this field has to ask ourselves. And definitely if you have thoughts on it, I'm happy to chat with you during the break. Just try to be nice, because we do feel uncomfortable about it sometimes, and we're just trying to do our best to help people, while also thinking about the structural change, doing these big letters, talking to the press, whatever we need to do. But it's a weird position to be in.
Can I get a round of applause for these two awesome folks?
And you.
Thank you. Thank you